glide slope is 3 degrees. Yes, what happens? You reduce your speed from 150 knots to 120 knots. Your ground speed is reduced from 150 knots to 120 knots. Now you can do this in two different ways. One is by reducing your task by pulling back on the throttle, or for the same throttle setting, a headwind can do the same thing, right? So anyways, the effect is same, 150 knots to 120 knots. You reduce the speed. What will happen to your rate of descent?
It will decrease.
Remember, it's more like what should be done to the rate of descent. Rate of descent it should be reduced, right?
Yeah, reduced.
For what? To maintain, if you want to maintain the same 3 degree glide slope. Yes. What change should you make to your rate of descent to maintain the glide slope? So it's pretty evident that you have to now reduce rate of descent. By how much? Now you can do this in multiple ways. Yes, can you tell me?
Individually also I can do that 150 into 5% of glide slope. That will give me 1. Then I can find the difference of 150 and 120, and that will give me 30 knots, and then multiply it by 5. So I'll have to reduce my ROD with 150.
150, that's it. So even without anything, pen on paper, you can simply find the answer, right? Which you probably can follow for the exam, right? So when you multiply these ground speeds by gradient of 5, it's easy here because it's 3 degree glide slope, only for 3 degree glide slope, right? So what is going to be the rate of descent in the first case with a ground speed of 150? What we just found out here, which is 750 feet per minute, right? And then rate of descent here with 120 knots is going to be
600.
600. So you can definitely see that there is a reduction in ROD.
By 150.
ROD must be reduced. It doesn't reduce by itself, right? Must be reduced.
By 150 feet.
150 feet per minute. How is this accomplished? How will you reduce the ROD?
I can either add power a little bit.
Yes, you have to add power.
That will
pitch up.
Or else, if I have my speed, if I have already my speed, so I can give a little backward pressure.
So if you are high
but that will eventually continuously reduce my speed. The speed is constant, so I'll have to add
constant, power. Yes, so you have to give power and pitch up. Add power and then you pitch up. Look at your VSI and you bring it down to 600. Right? Yes. Now the other way is what you told me, which is much more easier. So you can see that there is a change in speed.
Delta speed.
That's right. Delta speed is how much?
It's 30 knots.
30 knots decrease, right?
Yes.
Therefore, when you have a speed reduced, your ROD also must reduce. So since there is a 3 degree glide slope, you have to multiply this with 5, which is a gradient, and therefore 150. That's right, feet per minute. Less of rate of descent. Right? Okay. Understood the story? You're flying an aircraft on a glide slope of 2.5 degrees. Now you're coming for approach, and what happens? You have a hydraulic failure. The problem with hydraulic failure is some of the aircrafts, the flaps are hydraulic, and now you cannot select the flaps. Now, what is the use of flaps for landing? Flaps
they reduce this stalling speed basically, so I can fly at a lower speed, and also they increase the camber. So with the less speed itself, I'll be getting the same lift.
Yes, so flaps basically help you increase your camber, and therefore it helps to reduce your stalling speed. You can come down to a lesser speed. So what? So why are we coming at a slower speed?
So that we don't require the whole complete runway to stop down the aircraft.
The flaps during landing is required for a deceleration. And to get a maximum coefficient of lift. So have you studied about this in the technical lesson, putting these terms here? The coefficient of lift is maximum because landing flaps are actually higher stages of flaps, or you have more flap angles, right? Which can provide you better deceleration. Because why? Because flaps are parasitic surfaces and that produce parasitic drag. Right? Like you can feel that drag when you deploy the flaps on landing. You can feel that something is pushing you back. In Indian aircraft, you can feel that when you put it for landing.
While flaps 20 when we take, so at that time
you feel it, right? Yes. And it also produces enough lift, but it produces more drag. And as you said, this will help you to have a lower landing distance required. So landing distance required is less. Exceptionally useful when you're trying to land on short fields. Right, that's the whole idea about using flaps for landing. For takeoff, it's different. You need maximum acceleration along with maximum coefficient of lift. So that's we use lesser stages or lower flap angles. Yes. So what happens when you have a hydraulic failure during approach is that this thing is not going to work. The flap is not going to get deployed, and therefore, as you rightly said, you cannot lower your speed. Right? You cannot lower your speed because the aircraft is going to stall. The aircraft is going to have a higher speed because there is no enough drag. Therefore, the aircraft is just thrusting forward all the way. So you can see here, you have a hydraulic failure and you cannot select any flaps. Your approach is at 220 knots TAS. So your approach through airspeed is at 220 knots. Expressed usually in indicated airspeed, but for your convenience, it is given in true airspeed. Question number 7, right? And you have a headwind component of what? Of 10 knots. In that case, what rate of descent are you supposed to maintain? So story is a bit different, but coming to the problem, it is nothing different. It's exactly the same thing what we did before.
Yeah.
We asked to find out the rate of descent to be maintained with the hydraulic failure. How will you find that?
Yeah. We need to first calculate the ground speed also.
Yeah. So what is the glide slope here? 2.5 degrees. So you're just multiplying with 5 and stuff won't work here because it is not a 3 degree glide slope. Right, so 2.5 degree glide slope. What do we need? I need a rate of descent, which is I need, along with my vertical profile, I also need my horizontal speed. Therefore, I don't need TAS. What I need is the actual ground speed, for which I have to allow for the wind component on the TAS. So what is my ground speed?
So ground speed is TAS minus headwind.
Yes.
So it is 220 minus 10, that is 210 knots.
210 knots, right? Now, what is rate of descent? Rate of descent is the height which I'm supposed to lose 1 minute from the threshold, right? And we're now trying to connect it with a ground glide slope of 2.5 degrees where it is 250 feet per nautical mile. So 1 minute equivalent is what of distance that we are looking at? For that we need the ground speed.
210 divided by 60.
That's right.
3.5 knots.
Distance is 210 divided by 60. We'll keep it like that. You have to maybe solve it. 210 by 60, so many nautical miles. On a 2.5 degree glide slope, 210 by 60 nautical miles range from the threshold. How will you find the height
so
on
that
the
will
glide
give me
slope?
ROD.
That's right. 2.5
That will give me 5 into 100 into 210 by 60.
60. That's it. How much is it?
875 feet. That is basically the
875 feet.
ROD.
Right, and you're supposed to lose the speed in 1 minute, therefore this is nothing but the rate of descent. 875 feet per
1 minute.
Right? That's it. You have to maintain 875 feet per minute. Do you think it's a higher rate of descent or a lower rate of descent than normal? If your flaps would have worked, then you have to maintain a lower or a higher rate of descent.
Lower. No, it's a higher one.
It's a higher one, which means if the flaps are working, you'll maintain say 1000 feet per minute. That's means a higher. If the flaps were working.
No, I'll be taking more lower.
So if the flaps are working, what is the advantage? You can bring your ground the speed.
Okay. No. So I'll have to increase. Yeah, we take flaps in order to increase my ROD only.
When you have flaps, when you have flaps working, you will be able to come down at a lower speed. And what happens to your rate of descent when your speed is lower?
So ROD might be high.
Okay.
No, sorry, low. ROD might be low. Yeah, it should be low only. Yeah.
Right. Makes sense?
Yeah.
We have seen all these questions before with headwind component.
Yeah.
Right? It reduces. Right?
Yes.
You have to reduce it if you want to maintain this 2.5 degree glide slope, or else you will go low on profile. Right?
Yeah.
So let's see that condition here with the brake flaps working. So here you have a hydraulic failure. Here you have flap working.
Yeah.
So you see the next phase of the question there. On approach, you regain some hydraulic power and can select mid-flap position. And this enables you to reduce your approach speed. When you have flaps, your speed can be reduced. right? To how much? 190 knots TAS.
190 knots.
Your TAS is 190 knots. Be very particular about what is given on the question. TAS is 190. You still have the same headwind component which you have to consider, right? Wind has nothing to do with your hydraulic failure, right? So your headwind is there. Which
Headwind is
10 knots.
10 knots.
Right? What is
So
the
ground speed will now TAS minus headwind, that will give me 180 knots.
190 minus 10, which is 180 knots. Now, you tell me what happens if your ground speed reduces by 30 knots from 210 to 180. Your rate of descent also has to reduce by a product of gradient. But that gradient you have to find out corresponding 2.5. That is why we cannot really multiply it with the gradient straight, because you have to find out the gradient for 2.5. For 3-degree glide slope, you know the gradient is 5. That is why it's easy to multiply with 5. Right? So here how do we find out? Exactly the same way. You are on a 2.5-degree glide slope, and then 1 minute from touchdown.
1 minute.
That height is what is called as rate of descent. So find this out. I'll leave it for you. You can tell me what the rate of descent is, and you can analyze whether it is more or less. Did you realize that it should be less because the ground speed is lesser? Yeah.
Less. It's 90 by 60 into 2.5 into 100. 90 into 2.5 into 100 divided by 60. So it is 750 feet per minute.
That's it. So this height can be found out by first trying to find out what is this 1 minute equivalent distance, and that is going to be your ground speed is 180 knots. 180 divided by 60. 180 knots, so we know that it is 3 nautical miles per minute.
3 nautical miles per.
So how do you find the height on a glide slope 3 nautical miles away?
So it's 2.5 into 3 into 100 into 3.
Into 3.
Yeah.
That is 750 feet, right? And therefore, the rate of descent, you're supposed to lose this in 1 minute.
Yeah, so this will be my ROD.
ROD. So what is the change in ROD here? There is a decrease.
It is a reduction.
Decrease. It should be decreased by
120 feet, 125 feet per minute.
125 feet per minute. You see, what is the change in ground speed? It's by 30 knots. 30 knots reduction in ground speed causes a 125 feet per minute reduction in rate of descent. Can you find the gradient? Trouble. Remember, your rate of descent will change with respect to your change in ground speed multiplied with gradient corresponding to 2.5 degree glide slope. It was 5 there because it was 3 degree glide slope. For 2.5, we don't know what the gradient is as such. You have to find out. How will you find out?
Yeah.
You can find out here. So there is a change in speed of 30 knots, and that corresponds to a change in ROD
by 125
feet per minute. So by what factor should I multiply this change in ground speed? Is the gradient, right?
Okay.
How much is that?
So like 125 by 30, I can do it straightly.
That's right.
4.1 something.
Yeah, 4.1 percentage will be your gradient. For 3 degrees it's going to be 5. For 2.5 it's going to be 4.1%. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Right? We are multiplying the ground speed here with gradient, and that is going to give you rate of descent. And you can see this equation for gradient is rate of descent divided by
ground speed.
So we have derived all these things from that only.